However, one of the least understood forms of power is the ability to disappear without losing your influence. We tend to associate power with visibility. We imagine the powerful person standing at the center of the room, speaking with confidence, receiving attention, making decisions. But there is another kind of power that is quieter and in many ways more sophisticated, knowing when not to be seen. The moment you become constantly available, people begin to predict you. They know where you will be, what you will say, how quickly you will respond, and what will provoke you. And once you become predictable, you become easier to influence. Human beings often take for granted what is always present. Familiarity gradually removes curiosity, and constant exposure can reduce psychological impact. This is why some powerful people deliberately step back. They stop announcing their plans. They stop responding to every opinion. They become less visible on social media. They decline unnecessary conversations. They may even disappear from circles where they were once highly active. To an outsider, this can look like weakness, defeat, or withdrawal, but sometimes it is the opposite. They are creating space between themselves and the noise. Think about what happens when you are always trying to prove yourself. You explain every decision. You defend every criticism. You respond to every provocation. You make sure everyone understands your intentions. In doing so, you surrender something extremely valuable: control over your attention. A strategic person understands that attention is a limited resource. If everyone can summon your emotions, your time, or your explanations whenever they want, then they possess a degree of power over you. Disappearing, therefore, can become a way of reclaiming that power. But there is an important distinction. Strategic invisibility is not the same as running away. Running away is driven by fear. Strategic withdrawal is driven by purpose. One avoids reality, the other creates distance in order to understand reality more clearly. When you step away from the crowd, you begin to see things you could not see while standing inside it. You notice who reaches out because they genuinely care. You notice who only contacts you when they need something. You notice who becomes uncomfortable when they can no longer access your attention. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to notice how much of your behavior was shaped by the expectations of other people. This is where disappearance becomes psychologically powerful. Your absence creates uncertainty. People begin asking questions. What is he doing? Why is she so quiet? What changed? Where did they go? You don't have to answer every question. Sometimes the strongest response is to allow people to wonder. The goal is not to manipulate people through absence. The goal is to become less dependent on their reactions. Build privately, think privately, improve privately. Let your results eventually speak where your explanations once did, because the person who constantly needs to be seen is often controlled by the audience. The person who can disappear, rebuild, and return on their own terms has learned something far more valuable. You do not need constant visibility to possess power. There is another reason powerful people suddenly disappear, and it has less to do with secrecy than with human nature. People become comfortable with what they believe they can always access. At first, your attention has value because it is limited. When you give someone your time, your presence, your advice, or your approval, they notice it. But if you continue giving those things without boundaries, something subtle happens. What was once appreciated becomes expected. What was once a privilege becomes an entitlement. This is one of the most dangerous transitions in any relationship. People rarely announce when they have begun taking you for granted. Instead, it appears through small changes. They stop asking whether you're available and simply assume you are. They expect you to respond immediately. They become careless with your time. They may even disrespect you because they have become convinced that your presence is guaranteed. A psychologically intelligent person recognizes this shift early, and rather than arguing about it, they create distance. Notice the difference. The insecure person says, "Why don't you appreciate me anymore?" The strategic person simply reduces access. They stop over-explaining, they stop chasing conversations, they stop volunteering their energy where it is no longer respected. This withdrawal serves another purpose: it reveals the truth. When you are constantly present, you cannot always distinguish genuine appreciation from dependence. People may tell you they value you, but their behavior becomes much clearer when you step away. Some will make an effort to reconnect because your presence actually matters to them. Others will disappear because they were only interested in what they could receive from you. This is why absence can become a psychological test without you ever announcing that it is a test. But we should be careful here. The purpose is not to manufacture anxiety or punish people with silence. That is manipulation. And manipulation eventually creates unstable relationships. The deeper principle is about boundaries. You are teaching others through your behavior what access to you actually means. A person with no boundaries becomes easy to consume. They are always available, always answering, and are always helping, always explaining. Eventually, their generosity becomes invisible because people stop seeing it as generosity. They simply see it as normal. Power requires selectivity. Look at your own life. Where have you made yourself too available? Where are you giving attention to people who consistently give you indifference in return? Where are you trying to convince someone of your value instead of allowing your absence to reveal whether they recognize it themselves? Sometimes the most dignified response to being taken for granted is not confrontation. It is withdrawal. Step back, not to make someone suffer, but to stop participating in your own devaluation. Let people experience the difference between having access to you and having unlimited access to you. Because when your presence becomes guaranteed, its value can become invisible. And sometimes the only way to restore perspective is to let people experience your absence. Do not beg people to value your presence. Control your access, protect your energy, and let your absence reveal the truth. And once you begin to understand the power of distance, you discover something even more revealing. Silence can expose what words conceal. Most people are uncomfortable with silence because silence removes their ability to control the narrative. When someone challenges us, we can explain ourselves. When someone misunderstands us, we can defend ourselves. When someone accuses us, we can present our side of the story. Words give us the illusion that we can manage how others perceive us. But when you stop explaining, something changes. People are forced to interpret your behavior without your assistance. And that is where their psychology begins to reveal itself. Imagine that you suddenly become quieter, you stop responding to every message. You no longer participate in unnecessary arguments. You don't rush to correct every misunderstanding, you simply observe. The reactions you receive can tell you far more than a long conversation ever could. One person may become genuinely concerned and ask whether you're okay. Another may become angry because they are no longer receiving your attention. Someone else may immediately begin creating stories about why you've disappeared. Another person may not notice at all. Each reaction contains information. The important thing is not to judge these reactions impulsively. Observe them. What does the person's behavior reveal about their expectations of you? Were they interested in you or in your availability? Did they respect your boundaries? Or did they simply become frustrated when they could no longer cross them? This is why silence can function as a mirror. When you constantly explain yourself, you prevent people from revealing their assumptions, or you give them the information they need to construct a response. But when you become quiet, their response comes more naturally from their own beliefs, fears, expectations, and desires. There is also a deeper philosophical lesson here. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. We often waste enormous amounts of energy trying to control how other people perceive us. But perception is never completely under our control. People interpret you through their own experiences. If someone has already decided to misunderstand you, another explanation may only give them more material to distort. The mature response is sometimes to accept that you cannot control every opinion. You can control your conduct. You can control your standards. You can control where you place your attention. And you can control whether you participate in conversations that diminish you. This does not mean becoming cold or emotionally unavailable. Silence should not become a weapon. There are moments when communication is necessary, especially when honesty, responsibility, or genuine connection is involved. The principle is simply that you should not feel compelled to respond to everything. Power grows when reaction becomes choice. Think about the people who know exactly how to provoke you. If they can say one sentence and immediately control your emotions, they possess influence over you. But if you can pause, observe, and decide whether a response is even necessary, the dynamic changes. You are no longer being pulled by every stimulus. You are choosing your movement. And that is the real value of strategic silence. It gives you information while preserving your energy. So the next time someone misunderstands you, criticizes you, or tries to pull you into unnecessary conflict, ask yourself one question before speaking. Do I need to explain myself, or does my behavior already tell the truth? Sometimes the strongest answer is not another argument. Sometimes silence speaks and reveals everything. The deeper you look into why certain people suddenly disappear, the more you realize that absence is often not the end of a story. It is the preparation for the next chapter. There is a common mistake we make when judging other people. We look only at visible activity. If someone is posting, speaking, meeting people, announcing plans, and constantly showing progress, we assume they are moving forward. And when someone becomes quiet, withdraws, or disappears from public attention, we assume they have lost momentum. But real development often happens where nobody is watching. Some of the most important transformations in a person's life require privacy. You cannot always build something meaningful while constantly explaining it to others. Every announcement creates expectations. Every promise creates pressure. Every public declaration invites opinions from people who may not understand your direction. So sometimes the intelligent move is to stop announcing and start building. A person may disappear because they are learning something new, rebuilding their finances, developing a skill, changing their habits, or preparing for a completely different future. From the outside, nothing appears to be happening, but internally, everything may be changing. This is where patience becomes a form of power. We live in a culture that rewards immediate visibility. People want to show the process, announce the goal, receive encouragement, and prove that they are making progress. But there is a psychological danger in receiving the reward before achieving the result. Once you receive attention for saying what you intend to accomplish, your mind can experience a small sense of completion. You have talked about the transformation, and psychologically, that can sometimes reduce the urgency to actually create it. Or privacy protects you from that trap. When nobody knows what you are building, you are less distracted by the need to maintain an image. You can experiment, you can fail, you can change direction, you can begin again without having to explain yourself. And this is why powerful people often disappear before making their next move. They understand that strategy requires uncertainty. If everyone knows what you are planning, they can anticipate you. If your competitors know your intentions, they can prepare. If your critics know your direction, they can interfere. If everyone around you has an opinion about your next step, you may eventually begin making decisions to satisfy them rather than yourself. Silence creates room for independent thought. But there is another lesson here. Do not confuse preparation with procrastination. Disappearing is only valuable when something is happening beneath the surface. If you withdraw simply because you are afraid of judgment, you are not becoming strategic. You are avoiding life. The purpose of solitude is not to hide indefinitely. It is to return stronger, clearer, and more capable. Think of a seed beneath the ground. From the surface, it appears that nothing is happening. Yet beneath that surface, the foundation of growth is being established. Your life can work the same way. There will be seasons when you need to step away from noise, reduce your visibility, and devote yourself to becoming the person capable of handling the future you want. So don't be disturbed when your progress is invisible. Build without applause. Learn without announcing it. Improve without asking for permission. Then, when the time is right, let the result introduce you. Disappear from the noise long enough to build something the world cannot ignore. And this brings us to another principle that is easy to misunderstand. Powerful people understand that access itself is a form of power. We live in a culture that often celebrates unlimited availability. Answer every message, attend every invitation, explain yourself to everyone, be there whenever someone needs you. It sounds generous, and generosity can certainly be admirable. But when your access becomes unlimited, something psychologically important can happen. People stop experiencing your time as valuable. Think about anything that is constantly available. Its scarcity disappears, and with scarcity goes part of its perceived value. The same principle can operate in human relationships. When someone knows they can reach you at any moment, they may begin to assume that your attention is guaranteed. They no longer ask whether you have the time or energy. They simply expect it. And slowly, without anyone consciously deciding it, your availability becomes an obligation. Powerful people learn to interrupt this pattern. They become selective about where they place their attention. Not because they believe they are superior to everyone else, but because they understand that attention is one of the most valuable resources a person possesses. You have a limited number of hours in a day, a limited amount of emotional energy, a limited capacity for concentration. Every time you give those resources to one person, one problem, or one distraction, you are taking them away from something else. So the question is not simply, who wants my attention? The better question is, who deserves it? That distinction changes everything. If you give everyone equal access to your time, you may eventually have very little time left for the people and goals that genuinely matter. The person who constantly interrupts your concentration can receive more of your attention than the person who quietly supports your growth. The loudest person can become more influential than the wisest person simply because they demand more of you. Strategic people reverse this. They establish boundaries. They don't answer every message immediately. They don't attend every gathering. They don't explain every decision. They don't allow every person to enter their emotional world. Their absence is not necessarily rejection. It is often simply the result of having priorities. And this creates a healthier form of respect. Real respect is not produced by making yourself unavailable as a game. It comes from demonstrating that your life has structure and direction. People understand that your time has commitments attached to it. They begin to recognize that being close to you is a privilege rather than an entitlement. But there is an important philosophical point here. Boundaries are not walls. A wall says, nobody gets in. A boundary says, I decide who gets in, when, and under what conditions. That is a profound difference. You can remain compassionate without becoming accessible to everyone. You can be generous without allowing people to exploit you. You can love people without surrendering your entire identity to their demands. And sometimes disappearing is simply the natural consequence of enforcing those boundaries. You stop participating in conversations that drain you. You stop responding to people who repeatedly disrespect your time. Or you stop explaining yourself to those who have already demonstrated that they are not listening. At first, some people may resist. They were comfortable with the old version of you, the version that was always available, always accommodating, always ready to respond. Let them adjust. You are not responsible for maintaining someone else's convenience at the expense of your own direction. The goal is not to become difficult to reach. The goal is to become difficult to misuse. Because once you understand the value of access, you stop giving it away unconsciously. Protect your attention, control your access, and let your presence become something earned, not something assumed. And perhaps the deepest reason powerful people disappear is the simplest one. They are no longer willing to remain who they once were. There comes a point in life when growth creates a strange kind of distance between you and the environment that once felt familiar. Your priorities change, your standards change. The things that once entertained you begin to feel empty. Conversations that once seemed important suddenly feel repetitive. And relationships built around an older version of yourself may no longer make sense. This can be uncomfortable because human beings are naturally attached to familiarity. We create identities and then we spend enormous amounts of energy defending them. Other people also become attached to the version of us they already understand. They know how we behave, what we tolerate, what we desire, and what role we play in their lives. When you change, you disrupt that expectation. Suddenly, the person who always said yes begins saying no. The person who constantly sought approval becomes quieter. The person who tolerated disrespect establishes boundaries. The person who once needed to explain every decision begins trusting their own judgment. To the people around you, this can look like disappearance. But internally, it may be transformation. There is an important psychological principle here. You cannot build a new identity while constantly performing the old one. If you continue returning to the same environments, repeating the same behaviors, and seeking validation from the same people, They will continually pull you toward the person you used to be, not necessarily because they are malicious, but because familiarity creates expectations. This is why periods of solitude can become so important. When you step away, you create psychological space. You can ask questions that are difficult to ask when everyone around you already has an opinion about who you should be. What do I actually want? What am I doing because I genuinely value it, and what am I doing because I want approval? Which relationships support the person I am becoming, and which ones only connect me to the person I was? These questions can be uncomfortable, but they are necessary. Transformation often requires a temporary loss of belonging. You may have to disappoint people. You may become less understandable to those who knew the old version of you. Some people may accuse you of changing, becoming distant, or acting differently. And they are right. You are supposed to change. A tree that continues growing does not apologize for becoming taller. The mistake is believing that loyalty means remaining psychologically unchanged for the comfort of others. Genuine loyalty to yourself sometimes requires leaving behind habits, environments, and relationships that no longer align with your direction. But again, disappearance should not become an excuse for arrogance. Growth does not mean believing you are better than everyone else. It means becoming more honest about what you value and taking responsibility for the life you are building. Eventually, the period of withdrawal ends. You return, not necessarily to announce what happened, but simply because your new character can now speak for itself. Your decisions are different, your standards are clearer, your energy is more focused. And people notice something has changed. They may ask what happened to you. The answer is simple. You stop trying to preserve an identity that had already expired. So if you are entering a season where you feel distant from your old environment, don't immediately assume something is wrong. Sometimes discomfort is evidence that your old life no longer fits your developing identity. Give yourself permission to evolve. Disappear when you need to. Reflect, rebuild. Choose carefully what and who you carry forward. Because sometimes the most powerful disappearance is not an escape from your life. It is the moment you leave behind the person you no longer need to be.